So Pinkesh, you've been a CPO, you've been a CMO, you've worked in various different companies, some very, very big, some, what you'd call a mid-sized
Two people and a
enterprise.
dog.
Two people and a dog. And you've seen, how products have evolved historically. Now today with the rate at which AI is changing, now if let's say there's a startup that's building an AI product, how should they think about building a product so that by the time they actually launch the product, they're not irrelevant? Because the rate at which AI itself is changing, if you take 6 months to launch a product on an MVP, the tech that you've used might not even be relevant.
Absolutely.
So how do you think about that? And, in general, love to get your views on that.
I think the rate of technology change has always been high even without AI. But I think now that we are seeing a kind of multi-layered application getting built, right? So if you look at most applications, they use the infrastructure layer, thanks to all the AWSs and Google clouds of the world. Then you have the AI tooling layer, right? Then you have the AI agent orchestration layer. You finally then have the kind of application layer. And then finally you have the user who's interacting, right? In many cases, user is not even interacting thanks to agentic AI. So I think if you think about it, because there are multiple layers and each layer is now shifting fast in its own zone, it is becoming super important that the startups need to now focus more on creating delight. In fact, there was a time when there were more features is better. Then there was a time where more value creation is better. Now I think we're beyond value. Unless you're creating delight for that end customer, you'll become irrelevant very, very quickly. And I think delight is one of those concepts where it's not just about economical value. Right? A lot of people buy iPhones not because it's the most economical thing to do, but it's the most delighting capability that you kind of feel. Same in B2B. If you think at in our own sales and marketing intelligence space, if you look at companies like Gong, came in very, very late, and the delight was so high that incumbents who've been there, enterprise players who've been there for many, many years, are now seeing customers shifting from them to Gong. The more recent Clay, they just raised a couple $2 billion in valuation, and again, new kid in the block, yet the delight was so high that's allowing customers to kind of move. So in my opinion, I think this is the era of delight. And AI helps accelerate that, but at the end of the day, if the delight is not high for that startup to leverage that AI stack, you're going to become obsolete very quickly.
So when you say delight, and I'll go back to the iPhone example that you gave, is delight equal to experience, or is delight something beyond just experience of the product? Because on an iPhone, many a times, the delight is because it's a status symbol. Initially, that's how it took off. Even though it was the most expensive phone out there, the fact that someone could afford that expensive phone became a status symbol, especially here. I don't know if that is the case in the US,
It is.
But at least in India, that's how it took off, right? So from a product standpoint, if we talk about delight, is delight only experience, and is experience purely in terms of user experience, or is it the experience of working with the company that's building the product? So what exactly is delight? Because that's a little, I mean, you can go anywhere with delight.
There's a lot of definitions to delight, yeah. No, I think delight can be both subjective value and objective value.
Okay.
So in the case of iPhone, there's a lot of kind of brand bragging rights that come with it in some sense, right? And I think in consumer space, a lot of delight usually comes from that emotional value, the bragging rights that come with it. I think in enterprise, it is less about bragging rights, and it's more about, am I really enjoying the usage of this product? Even though it has less capabilities and less features, is it really becoming a gain creator as opposed to a painkiller? And I think this is the journey that I think a lot of startups who do well, they navigate this journey fantastically, because most startups in the earlier era were all about killing pain, automation. If I can do something humanly possible in 10 hours, I'll do that in 2. So essentially you're automating and you're reducing the pain of the customer. Delight is much beyond that. Delight is something that can create this gain that I was not going to be able to get unless I adopted this product, right? The ability for a CMO to have higher quality of predictable lead generation is not just a painkiller. Painkiller means you can do, instead of 2 humans, with 1/3 the cost, now hire a AI agent to do it. But a gain creator is something that I was not able to do before that I'm now able to do. So to me, in the enterprise space, I think delight comes from that capability, that feeling that I'm now able to use and do something that I was not. And also the experience, to your point, plays a very, very important role. In my opinion, experience design design in general is the new differentiator. It's not the capabilities and the features, but it's really how you kind of make that customer feel. And usually there are two elements, right? The proof of value and time to value.
Correct.
If you can show these two things quickly, it almost doesn't matter what are the 17 other things that this particular product doesn't do compared to the nearest competitor, because what you're doing is creating delight for me. So I think the adoption happens a lot because of that capabilities that will truly delight me in the enterprise space. Less about bragging rights. In the consumer space, there's a lot more of that emotional value.
Yeah, because like in the consumer space, being a basketball player myself, I think owning a pair of Air Jordans, a retro Air Jordans, was a bragging right? That gave a sense of delight. I don't think it was much of the experience of actually playing with those shoes. I don't think they were that great. But the fact that you owned one was the delight. So if I see, from what I heard, delight has two components to it. One is the sense of empowerment that a product gives. Say, I don't have to worry about this anymore. It's getting done, and I'm probably getting more than what I wanted.
And the objective value that comes.
Correct.
Right, not just the subjective value.
Correct. Yeah. And the experience part of it is something I want to get into a little more. But before that, I'd also like to get Pankaj's view. When you talk about, so Pinkesh spoke about delight with respect to AI coming in. So on the buyer side of things, when you look to evaluate this, do you agree with that? Is there a different lens with which you would look at AI products today? What kind of products would work, and what kind of experience or empowerment are you looking at when you evaluate startups, or not even startups, even like established companies with new products?
First of all, I was enjoying that conversation. I was hoping you'll go on and on, because it was provoking some very new thoughts. And I was thinking, when was I delighted, to your point? And the memory that came was last year. I bought Acco insurance online. And before that, somehow I was just used to someone calling me and doing all of that. And then someone said, in fact, one of the co-founders who I was playing with, she said, "Do you know about our company?" I said, "No." And she said, "Why don't you try it?" And it was for me like I had never done this before. I said, in 5 minutes, this policy is sitting in my DigiLocker. How cool is that? So to me, the delight was really something that I did not expect or had not experienced. It just happened out. Now, next time I may or may not feel the same delight, because now I'm used to that thing. So I did feel that an experience that you have not experienced before can cause delight. Now, it may not cause it again. Same for iPhone. Now, the iPhone was more delightful when I bought it first time a decade ago. Now, it's not as delightful. So again, I think delight is probably subjective. You have to keep reinventing it from different lenses and figuring out how do you delight again. So anyway, so I just thought I'll comment on that.
I think that was an interesting point on the insurance that you brought up. I won't take the name, it's not accurate.
Yeah.
But the previous insurance that I had for my car, I bought that online, and it took me maybe about 30 minutes to finish the entire process and get the policy. Everything was in place. But the problem happened when I actually went to claim my insurance. That because you've bought everything online, because you don't have a broker in between who was facilitating that purchase, when it went to a claim, there was nobody there to help me out. And turns out that when I filled the form online, there was some data error that happened, not from my end, because I have that documented saying I haven't disclosed this, but when they actually issued the policy, so it was with respect to a no claim bonus. So this was a vehicle transfer, right? So the no claim bonus is not applicable because there's an ownership change. So in the form when I filled it, there was no option for a no claim bonus, and over an email I had sent that saying there is no claim bonus, that's applicable. But when they issued the policy, they had applied a discount. So in the main policy document that said no claim bonus is not applicable. But within the pricing, to give me a discount, they gave it as a no-claim discount. So when I went to claim it, I had to spend like a month. My car was in the shop for a month because no one was able to figure out how to solve this problem. So when you talk about digitizing a lot of these things, and that's the question I think I was coming back to you also with, when you talk about experience, there's one part of it which the AI does, but do you also need a human in the loop along with the AI to make sure that the experience doesn't break? Because the initial experience, I think the AI does very, very well. But if it's about sustaining that experience and making sure that quote-unquote delight remains over a period of time, do you think AI can do it by itself, or do you still think humans are needed in the loop to make sure that that experience is high?
Yeah, I think there are too many questions coming in. The previous one, okay, so let me answer this. See, first of all, I think people tend to over-focus on the sales side as companies, as human beings. That's the first thing. So you over-engineer the sales part and get the delight, and no one has thought through the entire cycle. And that's true for forever. I mean, this is not new. In the digital world, it becomes more obvious very quickly. But if you look at any product or company forever when they were designed, their sales office is in MG Road and their back office is, you don't even know where they are. So I don't think this is anything new. I think just companies have just naturally focused on revenue and not so much on the service side of it, which is just reflecting in the digital world. And I don't, to my mind, it's not new. And hopefully, someone told me, and I have no way to check, they said, at least Echo people said that, we have focused a lot on making claims better because that's what makes customers sick. Now, I don't know whether they would do that or not. I haven't found out. But I think the answer is straightforward, that you have to think long term and you have to make sure that the entire cycle of the customer has to be taken. So customer journey and process orientation are two words which I think is generally alien to most people. and if someone can, and we have talked about Six Sigma forever, we talk about customer journey forever, but if you were to look at any company and actually see it, I doubt that has been imbibed in those companies, and it's a journey.
So one of the things that I mean, talking about this quite some time back, not recently, but I think one of the examples that comes to mind, especially in India, when you look at the credit card segment, I think fundamentally the reason why people bought, outside of it being a status symbol, quote unquote, American Express cards was because of the service that they provided. Right? You talk to a customer support from Citibank versus a HDFC or an American Express, the kind of experience that you would get by talking to a customer support executive at American Express was significantly better, and it was far more polished, which gave a better experience. I don't think the outcome would have been different. They would have gotten there faster and they would have gotten there better. Right? So do you think that is something that people have forgotten along the way, or is it just the pressure of get me more revenue, get me a higher valuation, that people focus more on short term than long term, and eventually they have to actually focus on long term to win? Like if you want to go IPO, you want to build a business that lasts and which is profitable, you've got to make sure that you have repeat customers. You can't always keep acquiring new customers. So you've got to make sure that you service them, and you've got to service them well. So with AI coming in and the rate of change which is there currently, and people focusing more on delight, quote unquote, from a sales perspective. So do you think that is something that's gotten lost along the years in terms of focus on success? Because I think the older companies back in the day used to, I don't know if they still do anymore, but is that some shift that has happened because of expectations of generating returns at a particular rate to investors, or is that just a cultural shift that the younger generation just stopped giving a damn about experience post the sale?
So first of all, I'm an Amex user, and I've always quoted Amex as the gold standard in customer service. They'll pick up your phone in 2 rings. Whatever you say, they trust you. So that's the speed of response and the trust that they is something which we don't find in, I would say, any other company. Maybe Apple, I mean, I haven't done too much, but maybe they are that exception. So if you look at NPS scores, Apple seems to score the highest compared to any other. So that is true. I think what is happening is there's too much distraction happening. So let me give you an example for this morning. One of the senior leaders in my company, in one of the businesses, called me and said, yeah, this DeepSeek has come. What do you think? Now, I had least expected him to call because he's in a brick and mortar old economy company, but interesting guy, all of that. So I said, what should I tell him? So I said, we are working with you, you are working on some problem that we are solving for you, whatever. Now, these new technologies will keep coming. And maybe some of them can make this problem be solved in a better way, but we have to wait. And I said what I had to say, that, DeepSeek, first of all, we don't know whether all of what has been claimed is true, but we'll find out. Let's assume everything is true, they are very cheap, they are whatever. Then someone will say, we don't trust them. These are the Chinese guys and they're out to get your data. Then what will you do? What if like TikTok, everyone started banning them, or like Huawei, then what? So I said, we don't know any of those. But let's not distract by that. We have a few problems that we are solving for you. We have some solutions. We will look at it. If this becomes useful, we'll use it. So don't worry about that. So I think people are getting a lot of distraction in the tools that are coming about and get defocused from their business. And I think I'm reminded of a quote in Instagram from Jeff Bezos where someone asked him, so many changing, what do you do? He said, I just focus on things that are constant. Customer obsession never changes. So I build my businesses based on the constants and not on the distraction. So I do think that many a times, to your point, and you actually in that question this was embedded, that people are getting distracted in some of this side versus just focus on the outcome, where most of the things that the customers want at a very fundamental level are not changing. They still want good service. All of those things are good. So I think we can just focus on the outcomes and the customer. I think things will take care. I think we are too focused on putting all our energy here, which I think is not so much. I think we have to just distribute it more here, less there. Jab wo theek ho jayega, then we can use it.
Interesting.
I think I also fundamentally feel, to your earlier question about what entrepreneurs and what new product builders of today's age in an AI first world should focus on? I think it goes back to promise of delight versus proof of delight. So on a lot of these examples that we were talking about, yes, somebody promised a bunch of things upfront, and I think to me that's not delight. That is a temporary excitement that one may or may not have felt. True delight is felt when there is a delivery of that delight. As opposed to the promise, there is a proof of delight now, which is where the claim actually hits. Now you're actually getting delighted, which is where the product that I bought in B2B was supposed to automate all these things. Is it actually doing it or not, right? So I think so now the trick is between this promise of delight and proof of delight, can you reduce the time to value? Because in enterprise space, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations are becoming impatient because of prior bad gaps between the promise and the proof. In many cases, there is no proof. In many cases, the proof came, but it came too late. 3 years, 4 years of, without naming companies, there are companies where it takes $1 million to buy the product. It makes $2 million to make it work, right? And that's the business model, by the way. Now, that's too long to even see the proof of value, right? Even if it does come. So I think in the world of AI, when things are moving so fast, the patience level for even an enterprise customer is actually going down, which means time to value is super important if you are trying to truly create delight. And in that process, going back to your second question, which is this kind of AI plus human or human in the AI loop, right? However you want to call it. I think it is super important to get some human element to make sure that the so-called digital worker, the AI agent, the automation that we feel the customer is going to get benefited from, has the right context. Because at the end of the day, fundamentally AI is getting trained on a set of sample data points, and now if those data points itself are not contextually correct, bad context is going to result into everything from hallucination to potentially bad outcomes and recommendations, right, from the same AI model. We already know that. Which means now, if I'm an entrepreneur in today's world, if I'm building something in the AI first world, having that human context to at least spark off the right direction for that digital worker, for that AI engine, I think is super critical in my opinion. Till we completely get into this AGI model, which is another big debate for another day, where it will surpass human intelligence completely. I think whenever that happens, great. I don't see that happening anytime soon, even with the current advance. Because every nuance of every use case that every customer is trying to get is very unique context. So I think we want automation, we want the AI capabilities to be harnessed, but the right context setting in the beginning, as you spark off that initiation, I think is better done with a human, in my opinion.
So when
he's triggering another interesting thought, let me share that with you. I know you haven't asked a question yet, but here's the answer. In this AI first world, the answer is already there without the question. So I read this book by Dr. Alok Agarwal. He was the founder of Value Serve Sky Analytics, and it says 100 years of AI. So he divides it from, I think, 1950 to 2050 or something like that, and we are now entering the fourth phase. So he said there are 4 sort of stages of evolution. I think the first technology he mentions is steam engine, and then the electric motor, and then the internet, and now AI. So he said these are the 4 sort of big technologies that have come into being. I think his argument is that each of those technologies took 20 years to become pervasive. And his thing was, it was limited by our own imagination of how to utilize it. So someone invented steam, then someone had to make an engine, and someone has to do something else. Similarly, electric motor, it had to do something else. Same for the internet. He's just saying that earlier, because they were mostly physical products, their imagination and adoption took maybe 20-30 years. Maybe because now there are digital products, it may be faster, but still humans. There'll be an early adopter and there'll be a laggard. So that normal distribution in a population will still play out. So our behaviors are not going to change tomorrow. Everyone doesn't stand in line for the iPhone still, right? So I do think that there's a phase approach of adoption of new technology, and we're still going to be limited by our own imagination, because people are saying AI first. But karna kya hai? That you only have to imagine. So many a time people say, oh, you know what? We have lots of data. Can you do something for us? I said, great. What do you want me to do? And they look at you and they said, as if I should tell them. I said, it's your business. You got to imagine. So I keep telling that, imagine that we have the genie. It can do anything. Now let's start imagining. But I think many a time we are limited by the imagination, because we are so much of a, this thing of the past, that we can't imagine a bright future. Why did Aqua have to come and reimagine insurance? For 50 years, people have been selling insurance online, and similarly for any other thing. So I do think that we have to remember that human beings are not as imaginative as much that technology can deliver, and therefore we should put the question first and AI as an answer. Although these days AI can help you discover the right question, but we still have to have the human in the loop to define the question and then get into the solutioning space.
So again, the question to both of you all, given you all have worked in large enterprises, when you all evaluate products that you all have to buy for your own respective teams and organizations, do you look for startups, or do you look for even established players that give you a product plus a sort of a service component, or are you looking to buy just a product off the shelf saying I will figure out how to implement this and I will manage this? It's just a pure transaction. I'm buying something off the shelf, I'll figure it out after that. Because I think what we spoke about also is some parts of it requires the human, because the promise is high when you sell, but to make sure that you actually deliver that promise, the product itself might not be able to do it, because the person who's using the product doesn't know how to get that out of the product, even though the product is capable of doing it. So when you guys look to buy products or engage with companies that sell these products, how do you guys think about it? And is that different across enterprises?
I feel like the delta there is between assistance versus dependence. So why we want humans in the loop, even in the large purchase at an enterprise level, I don't think we want to be dependent on the human and the full services piece that comes with it as much as possible. Because it's counterproductive, it's expensive, it is prone to errors, right? And it's not scaling.
Correct.
At the end of the day, it won't scale. So there's a difference between assistance, which is, like I said, the sparking off of that digital worker, that AI agent, with the right context setting. I think is a one-time thing. It's like call it an onboarding, call it a jump starting, right? And so that's where the time to value gets accelerated if you do that piece very well. So from my perspective, if a product promises me delight, I like it, but I want to see that proof of delight very quickly without dependence on human. I may still need a human to spark it off from an assistance perspective, but not an ongoing reliance on that human from a services perspective. That's counterproductive to me.
Got it. So but having a human, like let's say for the first 1 or 2 weeks to contextualize it to, again, kick it off is okay. You just don't want the human to be there consistently to make the product work.
System cannot rely on human for its continuous promise of what it was supposed to deliver till I get to the proof of my delivery. That's what I'm saying. So 1 week, 2 weeks, it's all contextual, depends on the size and the complexity of the product. But I'm okay with a one-time onboarding. In fact, I prefer that we do a one-time onboarding, so we kind of set it right. But if the system requires me to be continuously dependent on the human to get that promise and the proof of the delivery, probably a red flag for me.
So I think first of all, you spoke about buyers and sellers. I think all of us fundamentally are both buyers and sellers at the same time, maybe of slightly different goods. So therefore, we wear both hats at different points in time. So I think it's hard for me to say I'm a buyer of something, but I'm a seller of many other things as well. So that's one. Second is, I think again, because I sit in a large group with very diverse businesses, I think whatever example you will give, I'll say that's probably true in this place. So we are almost a normal distribution. So for example, if I have a mining business, it's a relatively small business, and their core competency is something. Now for them, I might say, you know what, you hire that vendor and let them do it for you. This is not worth your while. For a large company like UltraTech Cement, I would say, this is something you should do it yourself. It's a core capability, it can help you in the long run. You should do it totally in-house. So I think for the same activity in similar businesses called manufacturing, but in a very large setup, I might tell them that it's worth your while to do it yourself. While for someone else, I'll say, don't waste your time, you're too small. And which we do, in our own lives also. There are certain things we'll outsource, and maybe at some scale we would want to insource. So I do think that this make and buy is an ever-evolving decision depending on the scale, and sometimes also depending on, do you really believe it can be a core competency? Maybe at some point in time I'll tell the mining guy that looks like some of these technologies can really change the way you think. Maybe at that point in time start building capability. So I do think that it's very contextual. I don't think we are buying a software or a service. We are all trying to implement our business strategy in the best possible way and evaluating it to make it better next time and things like that. So these things will keep changing.
So if a startup, let's say, had to come and sell something, or say, I have a So two parts. One is convincing you on the promise, and second, helping you realize value to the promise. I think what Pinkesh was saying was, in general, we're all getting very impatient, so time to value has to be very, very quick. It's no longer acceptable to have maybe even a few months, let alone a few years, to showcase value from a product. So if some startup has to, let's say, work with your firm or the larger group, how should they typically think about their entire business model, not just their product, but their entire, or even service for that matter? How should they think about that entire engagement to make sure that they're actually able to get you excited to try it, as well as get you equally excited to kind of retain it and figure out how to actually scale it and implement it? Because many a times it just dies at the POC level for various different reasons. I mean, you can abstract it out to it didn't deliver value, but why it didn't deliver value could be a bunch of reasons. So if a young startup is ambitious enough and wants to pitch to you, how should they think about it?
So I'll give you some ideas, but I'm very scared of giving any advice to anyone, including my kids or a startup or anyone, because frankly, we are all limited by our own experiences. So I'll share with you what I think, because I think these startup guys are really smart and they can think beyond whatever I can tell them, but let me tell what at least I can see. See, one of the things that I've observed very generically everywhere, I think the world was very stable, became slightly unstable and become very unstable. And therefore I have created my own personal, what I call a 3P framework. So when I was 20 years ago in Six Sigma, it was process was king. When life is stable, process, you can govern by process. Slightly unstable, you said product is king. Now, because you have some flexibility. To me, the third P is really purpose. Now purpose is king. Not that product and so I think that if you are a startup, if you are an individual doing a job, if you can align yourself to a purpose, I am the best person in this area. I happen to have this product at this point in time, but by the way, I'm going to be very agile and I keep evolving it depending on what happens, and I'm not stuck here. I would love them. Because if you give me a product and I say this is it and I'll give you service and this and that, I'm not so excited. I'm saying my purpose is to solve this, and that purpose will remain the same. It will be solved in many different ways. Are you aligned to my purpose? Then you are my partner because we are going together, something like that. So I would think of them as going beyond the product and somehow convincing me that they are aligned to a larger purpose, where this product is just right now the current manifestation, but they are willing to evolve.
Got it.
And that I tell people for the job also. I'm saying, don't take a job based on a JD. JD is like, whatever, it's a process or a product, it's not a purpose. So you have to define, they may not tell you, my purpose is this. This JD happens to be an entry point for me in this organization, but it's just an entry point.
I think I may take a slightly risky, but maybe a more blunt point.
That's always good.
and there's no right or wrong answer to his point, but I think my position is that there's a lot of discussion around SaaS is dead. The jaw-dropping headlines happened a few months ago, a few weeks ago, from a lot of Silicon Valley executives rallied both sides, right? Whether SaaS is dead or not, I don't know. But I think what is dead, in my opinion, is this whole notion of charge me something. As a company, as a vendor, you come into me and say, I'm going to charge you something, and we will hope together and pray that some outcome will happen. Now, while that might have been a acceptable thing in the recent past, I think in the AI first world, going back to your main area of the question, to me, outcome is going to be super important. And so now every product builder also needs to start thinking to, I think what he was talking about, hey, what's my problem that I'm trying to solve? What is that outcome that I'm trying to get to? And even if you can't get me the full outcome, can you significantly assist me in achieving that outcome? And so now the pricing model, the business model, and when people say SaaS is dead, in some sense, I don't know about SaaS is dead, but SaaS pricing may be dead in the sense where charging me something so that we both can together pray that some outcome will happen in the future versus, hey, I'm going to charge you based on the outcome that I'm going to generate for you. Now, I know it's harder to achieve that and there's unpredictability involved in it. But if companies can figure that out, the next generation product builders, if they can figure that out, I think you'll be super successful in this whole outcome as a service as opposed to software as a service. Because quite frankly, it's a means to an end. I'm not wanting your software. Your software is supposed to give me the promise to get me that delight that we talked about, right? So as long as you show me the outcome, I'm happy to pay you even more than what I was going to pay you before. But this whole let's work together to pray together to make some outcome happen, I think is going to fade away in a very near future, in my opinion.
So it's more along the lines, if you don't want a tool which is a means to the end, you actually want someone who can take you to the end. To that outcome.
As close as you can. You may not be able to solve all my problem, which is a complex, yeah,
Pointed outcome.
but significant proof of delivery, proof of delight as an outcome. I think if you tie our relationship together as a vendor, as a buyer and a seller, to somehow to the outcome, I'm gonna be closer to get that feeling of delight than ever before compared to other options which are currently being practiced.
Got it. So I'm going to ask you, I think both of you are a slightly tough question because I want to know the answer to that. Now, in this entire promise of moving away from a traditional, let's say, SaaS pricing model, where the objective is I have a tool which is a bunch of whatever workflows that's stitched together in a usable manner, which basically says, I'm going to show you how you can use this tool to get to an outcome, but I'm giving you the tool, I'm charging you a small amount. You figure out how do you get there for your own business. To now saying, I will work with you and I will make sure that this gets you that outcome, and I'm going to charge you a lot more, but I'm only going to charge you when I get to that outcome. Now this, when you try to make this shift, the question is this journey to a large extent automatable today? Like, because there's a lot of, I mean, if you dig a little deeper, there's a lot more adaptability in the product itself that you're building, right? It's not a rigid product that might work. And neither can you sell a solution, because the minute you say it's solution, it's just services. It's prepackaged services in a different form. So if you're truly a product company, how can you actually move and make that jump to owning that outcome for a customer, or helping them reach that outcome a lot better than just giving them a tool and saying, I'm giving you a bunch of instructions and best practices on how do you use my product to get to that outcome, to I will work with you and my product is just a means of getting you there, but the reason you engage with me is because I will get you there and not just give you a means of getting you there.
I would love to know what Pinkesh has to say, but our experience with the big tech firms have been, and they've all employed now a lot more customer success people whose job is supposed to drive outcome and drive usage and all of that. So they are sometimes more business savvy, and they'll come and talk to you and how you can use it. They'll sometimes teach you. So they are kind of trying to get there. But I think for every small startup company to have that kind of resources, domain expertise, imagine all your businesses might be hard.
Yeah.
So we do work with a few startups in a very, very narrow range. Someone is really good at optimization. But we don't expect them to know how optimization can apply it in our group. I mean, it can be in marketing, it can be logistics, it can be in energy, it can be... So I think we have to also figure out who we are working with and what is our responsibility as well. We can't quote unquote outsource our entire responsibility to say, boss, you got to figure out my business and somehow feed me and then I'll pay you. Because many a time people do that as well. So I don't want it to go to the other extreme. I think it has to be a journey together where you have to play a much bigger role in imagining what you need and take accountability for driving it, rather than leave it to a vendor or a partner to say, boss, I had to give you a contract, now you go figure out. And that laziness can sometimes sit in, I would say, large companies, because they're so used to being sort of pampered and stuff like that. So I think I would say in today's world, and this is something that I have to educate a lot of my peers, that you got to invest in really, really smart people who understand technology. Because what is happening, unfortunately, is because big tech and other companies have sucked up great talent, and they are telling you what they're doing, but their goals are technically not aligned. They don't know your business. They can't imagine your future. So unless you have an equivalent person here, the buyer is, I think, in general, probably buyers have been in generally dumber than sellers. Look at consulting, look at banking, wherever else. Same thing happening. So I think you have to get smarter buyers. And to be able to, for the leaders to be able to imagine that this smart buyer investment will really yield hard result is a big journey, because they are not so used to it, because these buyers come in very different shapes and so on. Sizes, they don't sometimes talk their language. So that is the struggle that is happening, I see, in the large corporations.
Got it. So this question specifically comes to you as a investor and someone who's setting up his own venture studio. So when you look at startups, especially in this B2B space, to his point where you shouldn't operate at either extremes, neither should you be a person who's just giving them a tool and walking away, nor should you be a person who's saying, I will own the entire outcome to you, outsource that entire job to me. So it's somewhere in between where you have to collaborate with your customers, and that's varying levels of collaboration dependent on who your buyer is, what your product is. Now to the other point that he made, startups don't have the resources to set up like a 100-member customer success team overnight. And that might very well be what is required to kind of crack an enterprise. So how do you, so two parts to this, how do you evaluate startups to invest in when you know that this is a reality? And second, how do you work with startups to help them overcome this hurdle of, I need to be able to collaborate with my customers to deliver that experience. Neither can I just walk away by giving them a product, to what he was saying, nor can I own the outcome entirely saying, don't worry about it, you just pay me money, I will deliver results to you, I will do everything for you. Right? So how do you look at those two
I
things?
think each use case is different in the maturity curve of, like I said, are you a painkiller? Is the promise of this startup in that segment, whether it's customer service automation, whether it's marketing and lead generation, whether it is oil and gas mining, doesn't matter what the outcome that you're trying to help solve for. Are you becoming the more efficient painkiller? Meaning there are other options available to help with the pain of the customer, but you're the most efficient painkiller, which means you're cost effective, perhaps you're higher accuracy, perhaps it's easier to operate because no learning curve is involved, right? And so on and so forth.
Faster time to value.
Faster time to value, right? Or are you a type of startup that is entering a space which is already crowded with a bunch of painkillers, but your job is to be a gain creator? So I think the evaluation of that startup is also on the canvas of which space are you trying to solve that customer's problem for, and what is available already as an alternative. Because the ground reality as an investor is you also have to look at, not just 5-10 years ahead, but also can you survive the next 3 years, the next 2 years in a space that is currently having incumbents, options and alternatives. So to me, it's okay to not have that human in the loop if the pain is so big that you can come in without any human in the loop, and thanks to that AI first approach of what you've built, that you can significantly reduce the pain cost effectively. You will still be successful.
Got it.
However, if you're trying to become a gain creator, I feel, and this is just my bias right now, but I feel in today's context, things will change in, who knows, 2 years from now, thanks to what he mentioned like DeepSeek and others. Cost of compute is going down, cost of storage is going down, now cost of AI is going down significantly, right? Thanks to the new announcement that just happened 2 days ago. And I think it will continuously be that way, which means that the startup now has to kind of figure this out and say, look, if my cost of working and my cost of operating is going down significantly thanks to these technological advances, I better start shifting my focus from this fixed SaaS pricing that I kind of keep on charging every month to kill the pain. Can I start evolving to become a gain creator? So I think it's a journey that you have to peg yourself in when you start saying, what is my purpose as a startup? And I think enterprises are across the range. Depends on what use case it is. There is enough pain. Forget about gain creation. If you can just take half of my pain, I'm still happy without or with any human assistance. So I think it's the journey of pain killing to gain creation, in my opinion, that every startup needs to ask that hard question themselves.
I really like the pain to gain analogy. I'm going to use it in many places. In fact, I kind of relate to it because pain is far more defined and easy to solve, easy to measure. Gain is like limited by your imagination.
You don't even know.
The resonation that happened to me was in our own group. There's a company called Aditya Birla Health Insurance. And when I met the CEO first, he was not from the insurance industry. He's a chartered accountant, CFO. And he said, I want to create a well-being company. I don't want to create this sales through fear. I want to create, sales through well-being. That, so it's almost, now I can resonate, say, he was trying to create gain. Now, I know it, but it's very hard because customers are so used to just painkillers. And the people that you hire, they are so used to selling painkillers. Now, so he tried to do, so he's been still at it. But I'm just saying that what he says is really, really nice, but it takes a long while because the whole environment has to be changed. Your own people, your customers, processes, even your vendor, they are used to selling you something. So I don't think it's a great idea, but it will take patience and, conviction to stay with that.
But is it relevant for every startup to start thinking of that journey from being a painkiller to a gain creator?
I think so. Again, if the pain is too big.
Any examples that come to mind?
I mean, if you think about everything from data processing to wherever there's a human involvement, it sounds like a cheeky example, but think about marriages. while matchmaking can be AI matched, at the end of the day, there is so much more that has to happen in that so-called matchmaking of two people getting together, which is outside of technology and outside of the algorithm that matched me initially. Right? So now, how much can you automate here where all of a sudden you click a button and you say, I'm going to get married tomorrow because all parameters are finalized and everything seems to be matching. I think there is enough pain in the system that you'll never probably, I shouldn't say never, but it's unlikely that you're going to automate completely here. So I think there are lots of examples in the enterprise space where there is lots of unsolved problems. Marketing, I think, is one area, in my opinion, where spending so much time there, the unpredictability of how you can take a percentage of the revenue and plow it back into sales and marketing as a function, still has gone through and is still going through a lot of trials and errors. Right? So while I know that my budget is fixed for marketing and what I need to produce is also kind of quantified, which of those 17 channels I should be using today, a lot of pain in figuring out trial and error, little bit of experimentation, because every company is different, dynamics of the customers are changing, competition is kind of creating pressures on me. And so there is so much unsolved problem within this bucket of just one use case called predictable lead generation for me, right? And I think there's enough pain here. So I think a lot of companies will come in. There are, by the way, 800 tools now just in this space, the top of the funnel today. Many of them are very heavily funded just because nobody has cracked the code on how to predictably solve this problem, for the CMO, for the CRO. And so if you think about it, reduce churn, another very big problem for sales professionals, where every 1% of renewals that you lose could be millions of dollars for a large company. And it is actually bad business because this is an existing customer that you should have really no reason to lose them, but yet companies do. And so the impact of the pain is so big that people are willing to say, forget gain creation, just help me arrest this churn of customers that's happening. It doesn't matter whether it's a manufacturing company, like what Pankaj was talking about, or whether it's a software company. Everybody goes through churn because some customer found some other alternative slightly better and is now willing to go and switch to something, right? So I think if the problem space is too much unsolved, there is an option and an opportunity for a startup to still be a painkiller and stay a painkiller, still do well.
So in this example,
I was thinking, Pinkesh, I was wondering whether our IT services industry for the last 30 years has been a painkiller or not. And I'm now thinking that many of them are now insourcing and saying, you know what, I want to use more digital and this thing and all of that to create gain also. So somewhere, if I look at that, I would probably put it in the definition to say, this is what it was. It was a huge pain. People didn't know how to do it. And after some time, some people have become mature and to say, okay, not everything, but some of it I will do myself, create some gain because I see an opportunity on the front end. So I don't know. It kind of resonates with your definition.
Certainly, there's a good model to apply there, yeah.
If I go back to that example and to what he was also saying, right? So let's take demand generation itself, the example that you spoke about. You have a fixed target always as a CMO saying, I need this much amount of leads coming in from marketing, and you have a budget because that's also not endless, right? Now, allocation of that budget is a big question mark even today because you don't have it's not purely science, right? It's still art plus science. Now, when you talk about predictable, and you spoke about the problem of there is no predictability around demand generation, irrespective of how you optimize that distribution. That is still the single largest problem. That's a very big pain. So if someone solves that problem, and if that is the pain, what exactly is the gain for that in this scenario? Like what comes beyond that?
I think the gain is in two forks, right? One is the fact that now I can redeploy some of the same excess money saved from here to doing a lot more other things that I know I need to do, I know I have to do, I just couldn't do it before because of the fixed restrictions. So my backlog becomes much smaller of doing other novel things. Perhaps I send that savings back to the customer and say, you know what, when was the last time when somebody says I'm going to reduce the price of my customer? It doesn't happen. Why? Because of my unpredictability, I am scrambling just to make ends meet for that particular budget that I have. But if I have excess, think of this like the stock that gives you dividends. I should be in a position where an enterprise company should be saying, Mr. Customer, at the end of the year, here is a little check. Wouldn't it be great delight for the customer to receive a check saying, hey, thank you. By the way, a lot of insurance companies do in the US. They charge you what they charge you, and at the end of the year, they realize that we collected too much. That may not happen so much in India, but certainly in the US context, I've received many checks. And I'm telling you, next time I have a chance to switch my insurance company from here to somewhere else just because somebody is 15% cheaper, I'm probably not going to do that. Because now this delight that got created at the end of that, I was not expecting, right? To what Pankaj was saying, at the end of the day, it's unexpected. Delight also has an unexpected feeling. If every month I'm getting a dividend check, if every year I'm getting this as a practice, then I actually will start doubting, why are you collecting so much? If you're at the end of the day, you're just going to give me, that means you're overcharging me to begin with, right? But in this case, I actually I'm not interested in switching, because the loyalty and the relationship that I now built with that brand is very high, knowing that these guys are, so some efficiency that they must have done in their company is now allowing them to pass back that return back to me as a customer. I think every CMO, every CRO, if you can do more with less, this is the nirvana that everybody is kind of waiting for. It hasn't happened yet. I don't know a single CMO in a larger enterprise especially who says I have enough budget, that I don't need more.
Have you ever heard that?
So when you were saying all of this, what I was reminded of, I don't know whether you guys have seen this place called a podcast called Acquired. You should see it, and you should see Costco. When you were saying this looks like the Costco story. So there are these two guys who are investors, and then they said, you know what, we'll talk about company that we invest in, and we'll uncover the business model and how it works. So Costco, and I didn't know many of these things. We all know Costco is a great brand, great company, all that. But what makes it work is, so they said long ago that our profit margin will be 11%, that's it. And we will keep figuring out ways, and our buyers will keep figuring out ways to just reduce cost, and the excess will be passed back to the customer. So I think the reason they became big was they were cost conscious, they brought new products which had better value, all of that. So I think while they were not a digital company, I would say all the element that you spoke about probably apply to Costco. So many a time we try to think that the digital world is different, but some of us who have been long enough, looks like many things have happened. They're just manifesting itself in different ways. So there is some learning to be had from some of the older companies as well. The same principle can be applied, of course, much faster.
And the thing about Costco is it's a fascinating case, quite frankly, about this dichotomy that while you have a frugal buyer, and this is geography independent, everybody wants more with less, right? This has nothing to do with India versus US. While you have a frugal buyer, here we have a system where you have to pay $120 to even enter the store. Costco membership.
It's an annual membership cost.
It's the annual membership. But without that, you cannot enter the store. So think about this. The loyalty and the relationship building has happened thanks to the delight that has been created over the years, that every year invariably people are willing to pay upfront $120 to become a member to buy things from this store. While every other mall and every other store, forget about charging me, they're giving me discounts to even attract me to invite me with free samples and free this to even come to their store. And here I am in a line paying money to get into this store. This is the power of delight. This is the power of relationship building. This is the power of how digital or non-digital doesn't matter. But whatever they have done, it's created this huge relationship object between that buyer and the vendor, the brand, that it's sticky. And people will generally not go and leave Costco membership. In fact, if you notice, one of the most, like Amazon Prime is another good example on the consumer side as well. But a lot of people who for generations they're Costco members, right? So they pass on to their children, and children are used to buying it, and then their children. To me, I think that there's a lot to learn from that particular case.
Any examples that come to mind on the B2B tech side? Because even the tech example that you spoke about was largely B2C on Prime. Yeah. Now, is there an equivalent of what Costco achieved in the tech world?
I can't think of any. And I think the reason for that probably also is because the tech world is evolving so fast. There are so many distractions. People aren't there for too long. I think one of the things in Costco was that the founder was there for like 20 years or whatever. These days, if you look around, I mean, very hard. And they are also being disrupted now. Whoever was doing whatever in the LLM space is now suddenly disrupted. So I think people are not able to, I think, maybe, I don't know, with these distractions and changes, able to focus and get some of these going because technology is too disruptive. That's my view.
I think that I agree. I think the principles of their business practices also change. It's not just the people who are changing. Even though if it might be the same founder or same CEO for many years, thanks to competitive pressure, thanks to their own change, the pricing policy changes, their own fundamental philosophy changes. And I think when that happens, relationship takes a hit. And hence delight takes a hit.
Is Amazon that?
Amazon is probably the closest one.
They probably know.
That's all the B2C.
B2B, I mean, they also have a B2B business. I'm just saying these days, AWS is huge within Amazon. They will ask you, are we B2B or B2C? What do you think?
But I don't think AWS is Delight.
That's an arguable question.
No, yeah, that is true. That is true. That is also true. Yeah, if you chose the X.
To choose IBM. I think what does that tell us? For example, Cisco enjoyed that for a long time, where even if something is cheaper, the IT administrator, the network engineer prefers a Cisco. I think IBM, before it became Lenovo, I think enjoyed that. A lot of people.
Dell also had a strong brand for
exactly, right? A lot of people within a certain segment. A lot of people said you can never be fired.
Yeah, if you chose the X.
Decision to choose IBM. What does that tell us? That tells us that not only me, but my entire chain of management team feels so connected to the brand value and to the brand relationship that is an example that I would rather pay more but stick to a more predictable outcome which has established itself in that, going back to the same thing, proof of delivery, proof of delight. And if one brand has continuously given that proof of delight, I'm going to try and stick to it, not try to find an optimized solution, less effective, less costly solution somewhere. So I think we had that. But I think as more and more vendors came in, IBM also changed. The IBM of that day is not the IBM of today. The Cisco of that day is no longer the Cisco of today. So I think companies also have to evolve and they change their policies. New entrants come in, alternatives become available. And if the existing company don't keep up with the new incumbents, with the new alternatives that are available to the consumer, that delight fades away. No matter how strong of a brand you are, that delight fades away.
Is Salesforce anywhere close? I'm just thinking now.
Salesforce used to be that. I think now
they're also being
questions on what Salesforce didn't do for so many years. And newer players are now coming in, disrupting their business. If you think about it, how many more CRMs did you need? And yet HubSpot came in as now $1 trillion company. And now even today, a new CRM is going to come with a more AI empowered thing, with solve a specific use case, but do it so well that somebody may say, you know what, that's good enough for me. I don't need the full stack of HubSpot, the full stack of Salesforce. So I think it's contextual also. A lot of that is also segment dependent. I think to what Pankaj said earlier, that what is that narrow use case where there is a opportunity for creating delight. And if you can find that spot, find that segment and be that best offer for that segment, then that segment is going to, give up everything else and stick with you, follow with you. A good B2B example in my opinion is Gong. Okay. People love using Gong.
Why?
The experience of a CRO getting into it, and thanks to AI, it tells me now what is the likelihood, Mr. CRO, of you hitting your numbers based on all the activities that I've analyzed, on all the opportunities that is in the CRM. I'm telling you that you have a 92% chance of hitting these numbers. By the way, here is the 4 prescriptive actions you need to take now to go from 92 to 96. Never before this level of prediction with the remediation. Predictions were available before. Einstein had that in Salesforce. HubSpot had its own scoring things. Everybody had prediction. But I just don't want to know that I have diabetes. I want to know what do I need to do with this diabetes today So that before the quarter ends, and my job becomes a danger, because that's what happens to a sales guy. 2 quarters in a row, you don't get the numbers, well, we already know what happens to that person next, right? Now everybody loves Gong, because Gong is becoming now my life savior. It's no longer a painkiller. It's not just automating things for me. It is creating delight, which was never there before, right? So it goes back to that same painkiller to gain creator loop. So Gong is like a darling. Everybody is rushing to go to Gong.
In this example, that journey from pain creator to gain creator, or painkiller in creator, happened from when they moved from just being predictive to being descriptive in a very broad sense.
And the experience in which they made it so easy for somebody to access that information is also very important. The design, the experience of the user, in this case the CRO, the CMO doesn't have time. I don't want to go into some expensive BI reporting, hire somebody to even generate this 7-page to then figure out an analyst to tell me what does this mean. Very easy, one click, proof of value. Goes back to that proof of value, right? And thanks to AI, this was not possible perhaps 10 years ago. To go digest 8 million records and look at how many activities have not happened in that particular account, flagging it to be a risky account, probably was not easy to compute, because the AI models were not trained. So it's not just Gong becoming lucky. Gong is also leveraging what the latest and greatest developments of AI and making it accessible at a lower cost, which is now possible for Gong to be able to deliver that to the CRO, which was not there before. So it's not just that somebody came up with a bright idea, it's also the environment is now available and leverageable at a lower cost, cost of compute, lower cost of storage, lower cost of the model and accessibility of the model, which was not the case. That's why the DeepSeek example is such a big example, because arguably one could have questions because it's from China. Everybody raises their eyebrows 2 ways, 145 degrees and 130 degrees on both eyes because it's China, but it's open source. So one could argue that it's going to matter of time. If something is really bad, people will figure this out because it is open source. But if I can do this at 1/10 the cost, which is essentially what they've been able to prove, now 10 more Gongs are going to get created, which was not feasible 2 years ago when Gong got created, right? So that's kind of why the advance of AI is going to spur a new wave of innovation for the ability to create that gain and hence create more delighters, which was not possible before. So it's an exciting time.
Got it. So I think it's an interesting thing that you spoke about, right? And I covered some aspects of this in the last episode as well. So there are 2 ways of looking at this in terms of retaining delight or making sure that you're still able to deliver that delight. You can either do different things, which means you're going after newer and newer problems to solve and expanding the scope of your product, or even building multiple products. Or you can still stick to the same problem that you're trying to solve and do it differently to make sure that you're able to retain that delight. Because to your earlier example, if a company starts giving out dividends, it becomes an expectation, it's not a delight. The first 2 or 3 times, it's a delight. So when you talk about novelty, it can either be, I'm going after a problem that I haven't done before or most people haven't solved before. Or I'm still sticking to the problem even though it's a crowded space, but I'm able to do something differently which is able to give that incremental value add to a customer, which then translates to a delight, right? So what do you think, like larger companies should be looking at, and how do you think they can collaborate with, let's say, a startup ecosystem to be able to get that delight, like a Salesforce or a HubSpot?
And I think a lot of companies, a lot of larger vendors have realized this, and now they create what we call a marketplace, which allows newer, faster, innovative companies to almost integrate on top of the stack that they have built. Not because they cannot build that innovation, but it's also allowing them to become very good at what they are. So if you think about it, what is a CRM? What is a Salesforce core value proposition? It's a system of record.
Yeah.
And I will do the best possible job to keep that accuracy, the responsiveness of that system of record. Now, what do you do with that system of record is innovative applications on top of it, right? All possible use cases may not be within my own purview as my resources in Salesforce, because I may not even understand what a healthcare professional wants from that system of record versus what a oil and gas company wants from that system of record. So let other innovators, other entrepreneurs, other younger companies, let them innovate, build on top of the stack so that my end customer still gets the benefit. I still become relevant and still become sticky. If you look at what HubSpot has done, today almost 30% of the data of the revenue from whatever HubSpot generates comes from marketplace.
Oh, okay.
Not from what they built, but from what they enable through their APIs. And I think we are increasingly now working in what I call an orchestrated business logic. The business logic is no longer in one monolithic SaaS stack. It is orchestrated across, thanks to the agentic AI framework, which is the hottest thing right now. There is going to be now a master directory of agents. So just like humans were using yellow pages 25 years ago to find another human, an agent is now going to find another agent. In fact, each agent will have their own reputation on how well that agent performs. So that when I am given a task from my customer, I need to deliver outcome to that customer irrespective of whether I have the local capability of doing that or not. I will figure it out, internally find other agents in the directory made by other vendors, by the way, get the orchestration layer done and give the results back to finish that outcome. I think we are now increasingly moving in that era.
So the concept of marketplace again has been around for a while. I mean, I wouldn't say it's something new today, at least in tech. It's been there at least for a decade. And a lot of these companies that we spoke about have made them mainstream also. And historically, it's been that you go publish your product as an app inside that marketplace, inside that ecosystem to interact with that ecosystem. So much to an extent where, let's say, a CRM might just remain a system of record, and every interaction with the system of record might be through another app which is built on top of their marketplace. So in essence, it becomes a platform rather than a product. But with AI coming in and agentic AI coming in, two questions. One, the concept of marketplace in itself, do you see it evolving? And second, do larger companies, typically the ones who create these marketplaces, is there a different way in which they have to engage with the startups? Because we've also seen some of them becoming corporate investors, where they invest in a lot of these startups with a potential vision of maybe acquiring them or figuring out a joint GTM if and when it becomes viable.
I think the marketplaces of tomorrow are going to be very different than the marketplaces of what we've seen. And the primary difference in the way that they were architected. A app that runs on the Salesforce marketplace has to still adhere to the norms, definitions, and constraints of what Salesforce provides. The marketplace of tomorrow, where agents are decentralized. So you can be writing an agent which has no notion of the rules and boundaries of what Salesforce wants. Yet, an agent on Salesforce may discover you for a input and output purposes, invoke you, collaborate with you as another agent, as another AI agent, get the results back. That's very different. Now you're decentralizing the entire construction of agents, right? Which was not the case in the marketplace. In order for me to be on a HubSpot marketplace, I have to write to HubSpot APIs. In order for me to be on a Salesforce marketplace, I have to conform to Salesforce regulations, rules, boundaries. In the new agentic AI framework, it almost doesn't matter who's going to call me from where. I'm the best agent to do one use case. And as long as I'm discovered through a variety of other techniques, it doesn't matter which rules I need to follow. So that's kind of the big change. So marketplaces are going to be very different of tomorrow.
So it's not in terms of how you solve it, which was the original part, or original marketplace, which is more around following a fixed process. It's now more in terms of what you do, because an agent's focus also has changed, right? Typical automation was about process automation, to what he also was saying earlier on. But with the agents coming in, the role of an agent is not about how you do it, because that flexibility is given to the agent to figure it out. You're defining an agent based on what the agent can achieve, not how it achieves it.
That is correct. And who's going to call me? There's no preconceived notion on how I'm going to be invoked. That's
correct.
The key thing.
So there's no one fixed way. So that gives more flexibility to the agents itself.
And more reusability.
Correct.
So that saves thousands and thousands of development hours to not go create instances in each of these marketplaces. I build it once. And now the whole world can discover me and leverage me. That's the beauty of the AI agent, the agentic framework.
So in your view, Pankaj, like building upon what he said, so if there's a larger enterprise, I can take Salesforce just as an example. So is there anything different that larger enterprises should be doing to figure out how they can work with startups? And on the other side, should startups be doing anything differently in terms of how they're selling, what they're building, to be able to go back and work with these enterprises? Because, I mean, to what he said, you can't, it's no longer an isolated, independent thing. You have to figure out how you work with a lot of different things, even though you might not have explicitly architected it to work with those different things, because you don't know who's going to invoke it and how they're going to invoke it. You just need to make sure that you are invocable, for the lack of a better word. And so is there any difference in terms of how enterprises as well as startups should look at this entire thing?
So first of all, I think he provoked some two reflections in my mind, in which I'll use them to then probably answer the question. First was, it almost appeared that the agentic world is like the contract versus FTE world. I'm an FTE, I can hire a contractor somewhere through a discoverable marketplace and give them a work. I don't care where he came from, as long as he gave me what I wanted. So to some extent, there is some correlation to what we have seen in the human world, and the agentic world might not be too different. So we can apply some of those ideas. Secondly, I was reflecting on the enterprise example, and I was thinking, which are the companies which have done well and which one stands out? And in my mind, and I don't know I'm right or wrong, to me Amazon stands out from the rest of them on the aspect of what you said, doing different things or versus doing things differently. I think in all other companies, they were advertising companies for some people, or search company for some other, and then bringing the base, but they were sort of similar to both ends of the customer. Amazon, you could never define who they were for whom. They kept reinventing themselves. They were in the book business, tomorrow they might be in the space business, car business, we don't know. And we will still buy from them. As Simon Sinek says, that their why is what defines companies. But the why of many of the other companies have been fairly stable. So to me, maybe, and I'm just reflecting on this small data point to say, maybe you need to keep redefining your why. Because if you define your why too narrowly and remain with that, then many other people will come in and then do it better or do it differently. But if you keep reframing it, saying, you know what, I could be anything else for anyone else, could be doing differently or could be doing. So to me, it appears that maybe we should keep coming back to that question and redefining what we stand for, who we do stand for, and probably keep reinventing that place. Otherwise, if we become too stable and all these people have been disrupted because maybe they just became fixated on how they defined themselves and didn't change it. So that's just a thought.
I think they're the, sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask at that point, right? Because see, if you're building something new, right, you have to stick to it for some amount of time to be able to build it to a point where it actually adds value. Every time if you go back and say, let me relook at solving a different problem, you're not actually building a business, right? So the question comes.
Let me ask you the question that, what do you think Amazon has done to answer this question? I would say that at different points in time, they were building many things, and many things have died, many have succeeded, and many have come together and defined a value proposition differently. And they have allowed it to be very organically open. But many others have been far, and maybe they were a consumer company, and you can argue that in consumer space you can do far more. I couldn't think of a good enterprise example because I know that's where you are going. And enterprises, maybe they have that limitation, but I'm wondering, can an enterprise also behave in that consumer way in some way? And I don't have an answer, but that's what we are trying to do to answer your question. What are you doing differently? And we are trying to do a similar open source within the group to say, we have lots of companies, we will have other companies in the future, we don't know. What are those replicable open source capabilities we can create, which can be reusable and plugged and played? So we have an optimization company which is sitting here. Now that optimization is powering marketing, logistics, something else, all of that. Tomorrow, if we find a better optimizer, can we pluck it out and put it there and things like that? So I think we are trying to again build a kind of a futuristic marketplace for us so that we can be flexible, malleable, and depending on whichever way the businesses choose to define themselves, we can move around and create some acceleration for those businesses. So that's just an idea. We haven't done it. We are on that path.
I think it's also a judicious call of what the entrepreneur really sees the growth as. Are you trying to build a platform, or are you trying to build a portfolio? And those both are slightly different paths that one would have to take. You could argue companies like Microsoft have probably done both. If you think about, is Microsoft Office a platform or a portfolio? It's a portfolio, even though it's kind of consolidatedly sold in a certain way. On the other hand, there are companies like Cisco's and Salesforce, which are platforms where they've added and enabled others to add modules on top of it. But you still have to buy the platform to get anything. In this case, you can just buy Microsoft Office and not buy anything from Microsoft, right? So there is no right or wrong answer. I think as a new entrant, when you have limited resources and lots of problem to solve, you have to anchor and narrow down to the most unsolved problem that you feel needs to be solved. And there is an opportunity to not just be like I said, a painkiller, but an opportunity to become a delighter, right? A delight creator. I know you are building something exciting. So maybe it will be interesting to understand how you are seeing this. Because I'm sure while you would like to have enough resources like a Salesforce, you probably have slightly less than Salesforce.
Slightly.
In terms of resources. But the ambitions can be larger than that of a Salesforce, right, at the same time. And so from your perspective, how are you prioritizing and building and focusing the big disruptive thing that you've started the journey on?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what we did. I think we consciously made a call based on our past experience as well, saying we're not trying to go and find a new problem to solve, right? So when we spoke to a lot of potential customers, and again, we'd built a couple of products in the past. We've also been in consulting for like more than a decade, where we've seen enough of these new ideas coming to light, solutions being built. I think along the lines, what we realized was, even if going back to what we spoke about in the first segment, which is on the demand generation and how do you get a delight there. So I think the fundamental problem still remained saying what you exactly said. For a CMO or for a CRO, there is no predictable lead generation that's happening today with everything that's out there. So you hire a team, you hire a great team, you get every possible product that's out there, including a lot of these AI agents that specifically try and solve that problem. See, I think end of the day, the gap still lies around the fact that predictability is a very big issue. So when we made that call, we consciously made a call saying, let's not try and solve a different problem. This is a problem in itself. And every product that's in this space has now become just a painkiller. Right? It's lost the advantage, no longer a gain creator, because a lot of things on the back end also has changed. The ecosystem has changed. So products that were working also in the past have stopped working the way they used to work. So we consciously made a call saying, let's try and solve the problem still remains the same, the solution changes. So we said, let's try and do things a little differently. And I think a lot of what we covered in this episode, I think is what we've also actually done. Right? So first thing we did was we said, let's not focus. If you look at any of the AI, quote unquote, SDRs that are out there, I think they're still workflow automations, but more intelligent workflow automations. It still comes down to the person using that tool to be able to extract maximum value from that, and it's not necessarily engineered to be able to do that as well. Right? So when we designed this, because I think right place, right time was very important for us, because even though we are very early and we're one of the first few players in this space, we were not the very first to be able to enter the space. There were a few people who had already entered it. And we learned where the gaps were from what they had done. And I think fundamentally the gap was, you need to be able to help people, to what you were saying, own that outcome, collaborate with them, saying, you don't worry about what channels I have. You don't worry about how I'm going to write my emails or how I'm going to write my LinkedIn messages or how many of them I'm going to write. All you have to do is work with me initially to set this up to a point where I can deliver, let's say, 10 meetings a month consistently for you. Now, how I do that is again going to be very, very different. But for a customer, it's no longer about I am buying a tool which has these 20 features. I am collaborating with an AI product company that can automate the process of building a predictable pipeline for me. And that is the difference in terms of our approach. So we said we're not going to try and take the same approach of saying I will build as many integrations as possible, I will build or I will get as much data as possible, or I'll try and get every channel out there in the world, and then let the user figure out how to make the most of it. We said, even if we pick only one channel, and that's the reason we started with email, because that's the most scalable channel, that's your foundational channel. We said, let's find a way of doing things differently so that email first works before we go and add everything there. And that's what's worked for us, right? So even if you look at how we've built it, and we've spoken about this in the past as well. See, we ourselves have multiple different agents that we've deployed, and the way what powers those agents also keeps changing because the tech changes. So that's also how we remain relevant even though the tech changes. Because again, the job of an agent, unlike if you look at RPA, so there was this entire concept of RPA to IPA. I think we're in that journey with these AI agents, right? So it's not about automating a workflow where you're saying step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, let me build a bot that can automate all of it. You are telling an agent saying this is your purpose of existence, this is what you have to do. Now, even the kind of inputs that you take and the outputs that you give can change, but the purpose remains the same. So we define those as agents based on purposes. And what powers those agents can change. It might be GPT today, it can be DeepSeek tomorrow, it can be something else. Right? Fundamentally, the way we've built that solution also is saying we'll build a bunch of smaller and smaller agents. Each one of them have a purpose. And that purpose is based on understanding how do you get that predictability in outcome and what are the gaps. Like I'll give you an example. Like most of the players out there today have one big pain problem, which is email deliverability. If I take email as a channel, if I send 1,000 emails, everything is going to spam whether I like it or not. So we built an agent saying an agent's job is only to make sure that email deliverability issue is fixed as well as possible. Now how that agent solves that problem keeps changing, and we also keep kind of experimenting, figuring out what new things to do. But when we look at building the product and architecting it, that agent's role remains unchanged. And we can keep adding more and more agents into it. And I think that's what's worked for us when we go and pitch this to customers, also saying, don't worry about how many features I have. Don't worry about how good a UI I have. Your pain problem, your main pain point today, which again we have to translate into again, is you don't have predictability on lead. Like every customer of ours that we've spoken to more or less said the same thing, saying, I've hired the best team possible. 1 month they give me 10 meetings, next month they give me 3 meetings. I go back and create a projection for the strategy saying, I will get this much percentage of revenue. It's like pipeline is not there to deliver that. I'm going to kind of get my ass kicked by everybody else down the stream saying, you're not giving me enough leads. And the only way I try and react is I'll spend more money on ads, hopefully saying it will give me those leads. And the fundamental problem is I don't have predictability on anything. Now, if we can solve that predictability problem, I think the customers will stop asking the question of how you do it. It's more about what can you help me achieve? And let's collaborate to make sure that this is scalable without adding people, to your point. So the initial part of it, we still do with human in the loop, wherein we do help them configure this. So even though we have a lot of these agents that are in place and a lot of complexity that's built in, the ability to configure that specifically for a company is still very cognitive, right? And there isn't enough data out there in the world for an AI to do this by itself. So in essence, what we're doing is building that data for our own AI agents to be able to adapt to the DNA of a particular organization, which is where there's a human in the loop. But that's a one-time thing to what we discussed, right? And from there, it basically figures out how does it self-replicate and get to a point where it can sustain that output in a very predictable manner. And that's fundamentally the flip that we made. And I think along this journey, what we've also realized is some of the partners, and it becomes important for us to build a lot of strategic partnerships with the existing incumbents. So it's important for us to not look at incumbents as competitors, but as strategic partners. Like if I take HubSpot or Salesforce or even ZoomInfo, right? These are all strategic partners because my agents will work with them to what you were saying, right? If they have agents, they'll be able to discover us. If we have agents, we'll be able to discover them. The idea is how do you build this ecosystem where it is not hard and fast, but given an objective and given a task, you can figure out based on whatever is available. How do I utilize that in the best possible way to deliver that outcome? And I think that's fundamentally what we've done. And we're also figuring out how we can kind of accelerate this entire journey and productize this as much as possible. Because we did a lot of this with a lot of human in the loop like 6 months back. But we understood what can be productized and we started productizing it. Now, maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll have enough data that we don't even need to we don't even need a human in the loop to do that contextualization and onboarding. But as of today, in essence, that entire process of human in the loop is just creating data for our AIs to be able to understand how does it go and contextualize itself and deploy itself inside an organization, so it kind of get entrenched into their own fabric.
So Pinkesh, is this a good example of that pain to gain framework? Because it appears that he's saying, I'll give you 10 this thing, I'll make sure email gets delivered. So it looks like it's predictable, outcome oriented, and not just I'll reduce your pain and maybe you will get something. That's what it appears to be.
I think they are on a good journey to delight.
So anything that you guys think we should be careful about, because it's very easy to what you said, there are a lot of distractions out there. So it's very easy for us also to be able to lose focus and go down on the wrong path. So based on all your experience, anything that we should be careful about when we're doing
I think that, now your purpose is generating 10 leads a month. You need to come back to it and say, does your customer continue to need that as their primary thing, or have their needs changed to something else, because those leads are going to lead to something else. So I think continuously coming back and figuring out what is the end goal of that customer, and maybe that goal can be served differently, better, whatever. I don't know, because
see, that will evolve once we get there. Like for example, let's say we're working with a customer X, right? We consistently are able to deliver 10 meetings a month to them. We do this for 6 months, it's no longer going to be a delight to what he said. People are going to get used to it.
Exactly.
So you'll have to figure out where to go for
what's the next one.
Yeah, but you can't lose focus on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the idea that, like he said, that pain, that gain over time becomes like a painkiller, then what's the next gain?
Correct.
Next gain is always a art and not a sign, because it's not obvious, because there are so many different options. Pain is usually known because it's paining. Gain is unknown, it's an opportunity. So I think that's where I think some more effort needs to go, because that's not easy, and you have to do far more creative thinking and experimentation to discover those, is what I would say.
But
I think a mesh of collaboration would be my recommendation, to always keep that perspective that while I am doing what I am doing, in the overall chain of the customer journey, what are the other adjacent areas of pain or unsolved problems? And can I solve them without me getting distracted from the core part that I'm doing? But can I now have collaborative mesh of partnerships that I can bring to the table for the customer without the customer having 3 new tools to go deploy? This is what I really like about what you're doing, about your omni-channel perspective, that I will have multiple channels of outreach for that same customer. While email seems to be your strong area, what I'm seeing you also talk about is we're going to do a LinkedIn approach for the same outcome, but from a different channel. We're going to use a WhatsApp. We're going to use a physical, nudge with a gift. All these are approaches to still come back to the same outcome that you are trying to do. But instead of you doing each one of this on your own, you're collaborating with other. This is what I call the mesh collaboration. I think you're already, as long as you keep on pursuing that, it looks pretty good.
nice.
And I think, leads are a intermediate value chain. I'm just reminded of one statement from Ramcharan Maharaj. He said, the moment your first employee walks into your door, you should tell him what they do, how does this make money. So many a time we focus on something, but we need to know how does that make money for whoever they are. And the more focused we are on that, I think we will discover those niches, unsolved problems, other opportunities and all of that. So sometimes the commercial aspect should not get lost, because many a time we become very technical and we're saying, hey, we're doing this and we are bringing 5 more features and this, that and the other. But what's the business that those customers are in, and how are they converting this lead into money in the most efficient way and things like that. So and just ideas to consider.
Very interesting, because I think we've also internally had this debate too many times. So especially when we talk about painting a product vision, our vision can't be narrow-sided, right? Even though our execution has to be very short-term focused, our vision needs to be long-term. So when you talk about where we are, right, there are 2 ways in which we can go. Right? We can either say we are right now at one part of top of the funnel. Right? Now we can either say we go deep and take these leads all the way to conversion, and we figure out how we orchestrate that. Or we can go wide saying, I will be your one single partner to replace them all with respect to building a pipeline for you no matter what, period. Be it inbound, be it outbound. And standing today, I don't know what is the right answer, or if there is one right answer in terms of how we...
I think the question is not what you don't know today. And the question is, are you willing to continuously listen and adapt to what you need to know tomorrow?
Fair.
I think as long as you have that, you're good.